Alrighty, hello everyone and welcome back to another WebDev lesson. Today we're moving into Module 2, so you have successfully completed Module 1. Let's do a brief recap here. I pulled up what we did in Module 1 and it is a long list. So let's see. In 1A we covered functions, we covered what they are, how to use them. We also covered like a ton of terminal and GitHub stuff. And then in 1B, we covered using function arguments. Then 1C, you had a bit of a review. It's also function scope. And I don't believe we had a D segment. Today we're going to be moving into Module 2, and this is Module 2A. We're going to be covering something called an array. An array is a primitive data structure in JavaScript. We want to devote Module 2 to dealing with primitive data structures in JavaScript, and we're going to learn like what does that mean, what are these data structures. We're going to cover all that with this Module 2, several sections, because these are huge things and they're very, very important to working with the JavaScript language and pretty much every other language. Okay. Alright, so what I have here is kind of a list that I've formed using variables. And just so you know, this is not a good way of doing things. I'm just doing this to demonstrate. But let's walk through this example real quick. So let's say I've created a variable called var1 equals, and then I've set it to equal a string. And in this case, it says item 1, right? And I've done this, so on and so forth, until we get to var4, and we've got item 4, right? And then I've created a function called return passed in value from list, okay? And what this does is we pass in a list item and then we return that list item. Pretty easy, right? So we're console logging return passed in value from list. And 1, we're passing in this variable here. So let's go ahead and run that. And you'll see we get the string item 1, which is good. That's what we want, right? But this is not a very good way of doing things, okay? We can see from this example that this example works, but there are lots of other examples where this wouldn't work. Unfortunately, we haven't gone through enough JavaScript syntax or JavaScript theory up till this point to be able to cover those kind of things, so I'm just going to cover them in a list. But this is kind of the thing you would do right now, and this, for what you'd be coding right now up till this point, this would work fine. I just wanted to demonstrate that fact. What we're moving forward to, though, are more complicated programs, and this kind of a list will not work for several reasons. One, it's tedious work, okay? It might make sense if we had 4 items to list them out like this, and we knew there wouldn't be any more, and maybe we're going to change maybe 1 or 2 of them later, and we just want to just keep, things simple and just do it this way. Okay, maybe. But if we had 100 items or 1,000 items, this would be a lot of work to every time type var5 equals whatever, right? Every time for 1,000 items, that is just, it's ridiculous, and it doesn't need to be done. So it's very, very tedious. Another reason is you can't efficiently iterate or loop over this kind of a list. It's very hard to loop through these things, especially if maybe we misnamed one, right? We didn't name it the right thing. And so we're in the next item on our list. Oh, wait, it doesn't exist. What's going on? We would get a lot of errors. It's almost impossible to try to list through this kind of a thing. Okay. It's hard to dynamically add or remove items from this kind of list. So if I wanted to, through the code, add a new item, for this particular way of doing things, I would have to actually write a function that spells out a word, and it would have to spell out the very next word. So it would have to see if which variables exist, and if variable 4 exists, does variable 5 exist? No, variable 5 doesn't exist. Okay, let's create one. Okay, it's a lot of unnecessary code that would take a lot of time for really no reason. It's hard to keep all those variable names straight, okay? Like if we get up to 1,000, that's going to be a pretty long variable name, like 1,000, right? 1,032, 1,033, 1045, right? It's kind of ridiculous. And when you break it down like that, it really doesn't make a lot of sense. It's hard to try and dynamically retrieve data from this kind of list. So we talked about iterating over this list or looping through it, right? It's almost impossible to code all of that. And finally, JavaScript is built with way better ways of keeping track of items and keeping track of things like lists. So what we're going to cover today are arrays. Woohoo! Beautiful, beautiful arrays. Okay, this is an example of doing the very same thing that we did up here, but using an array. Okay, and each of these, so arrays consist of, let's build out an array together. An array consists of two hard brackets, right? And inside we have each of our items. Now these items could be strings, like I showed you above. This is a string, right? And or this could be a number. So we could have 1, 2, 3, 4, right? You could have numbers. Inside of our array at each index, we could also have another array. So if we had another array in here, and then let's say in this array we had 1, 2, right? And or maybe in this array we had some strings like string 1, and then string 2, right? So now we can have an array inside of an array. That's completely possible. And each of these points, right? And by points, this is something to remember, and this is actually very important. Each of these are comma-separated indices. They're indexes, and we could reference those indexes. So let's create. Let's assign this a variable name. So var string array, right, equals an array. Okay. Now, if we wanted to reference, say, our third item, we would do this. We would say string array at 2. Now, I know that doesn't make a lot of sense. Let's walk through this real quick. Let's try to reference our very first item, okay? We would reference it with a 0. Now, if this doesn't make sense, that's probably because I haven't described something kind of important about arrays. Arrays are 0 indexed, right? So they start at 0. So this is the equivalent of 1. So you'd be saying, if you want the very first item, you look for 0, index 0, okay? So this is how we would look for our very first item on our string array, okay? We would say string array, and then we do hard brackets. That means we're going to look inside of this array, okay? And then we would specify what index we want to look for. And in this case, it's 0. So to prove this to you, I'm going to console log this particular index, which index 0. And let's comment out this code up here and move back down. Okay, ready? Hit enter and oops. Okay, now let's do it. Here we go. Item 1. Look at that. And if I were to change this to say string 1, right? We should now be looking at that, and we hit enter and string 1. And there you go. And if I were to change this to a number, say just a number 1, and console log it, there we go. What if I wanted to console log our fourth item? Well, I would say let's go to index 3. We look at 0, 1, 2, and 3. And item 4. Okay. So hopefully that makes a bit of sense. What I want to just briefly touch on, because we're going to cover this a lot more in the next couple lessons, we're going to be spending a lot of time with arrays and another primitive data structure called objects. But what I want to briefly cover is that there are things called methods, and we're going to touch upon methods later. I'm just going to use that word, and I'm not going to get into it yet, but I'm just going to say that there are methods on arrays, okay? So we can call an array method that says string array dot length. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to console log this. So let's grab this here and we'll pop this into our console log. So rather than console logging a specific index, we want to get the length of our array. Okay, and if you see, it actually tells us the length of our array by telling us how many items are in the array, which is really cool. So what if I were to do this? Let's console log string array.length minus 1. Okay, a little bit of math here, but what we're doing is we're taking the string array.length, which we know is 4, and we're subtracting 1 from it, right? Because, and what we're trying to do is we want to get access to the very last item in our array. So we have to do it this way because remember, they're 0 indexed. Arrays are 0 indexed. So if we want to look on our last item, we go to our length, which you see returned 4, but remember, if we try to look for the 4th item, let me get rid of that. Let's look for the 4th item. Aha, undefined. It doesn't exist, okay? Because we're looking at index 4. There is no index 4. The highest index is index 3. So to do this, to get the very last item, we're going to look at string array.length, which remember returned 4 earlier, minus 1. Now we do that, and we have our last item. To further solidify this fact, I'm going to say this is our first item, and this is our last item. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put some more items in here, right? And I'm going to say middle item, right? And we'll put maybe in here we'll make this 3, and then in here we'll actually make this an array, okay? And inside of this array, let's say we want inner array, right? And so now, even though we've done all this stuff, okay, this should still give us our very last item. So let's test that. Used to be item 4. Now let's see. What did it log? There we go. Last item. Really cool, right? There would be no way for us to try and do that with, well, there is a way, but it would be crazy complicated and completely unnecessary because JavaScript has given us these arrays that we can use to look up indices. We can look up the length, and there's a lot of other stuff we can do. These arrays are very, very powerful, and I think once you learn how to use them, you're going to be using them on a daily basis. They're very, very powerful anytime you have to deal with lists. Alright, so I hope that made a decent amount of sense. I think I went through pretty much everything we could cover in the basics of arrays and how they work. Like I said in the video, we're going to mention more stuff about methods and things like that in future episodes. So don't worry too much if you don't really understand what methods are at this point. But the only method we used was the .length, just so we could say what the length of the array was, and then we subtracted 1, so we got the very last item. So that's all we did with methods in this video. We're going to do a lot more with them later on. So, after you've finished watching this, and you're not confused about anything, go ahead and start the exercises below this video, and when you finish those, you can go ahead and move on to 2B, and we will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.